Untapped with ME, and I am ME. And on this podcast, I like to do my two favorite things, as some of you know, and that is to tell stories, true stories, crazy stories about me and my life in Nacogdoches, Texas. And so I also like to drink lovely, crazy, delicious beer. And tonight I am drinking Daddy's Juice Box. Kids got their juice box, but Daddy's got his juice box. And this IPA is made at the True Vine Brewery just up the street in Tyler, Texas. Yes, it's a double IPA. You know what that means? It means that there is more malt, more hops in here, and that means it's stronger. Let me taste it. Yeah, it's stronger than most, and that's okay because I'm home. I'm home and I'm zooming it up with my dear friend, Jerry Poole. Say hello, Jerry.
Hey, how's it going?
Jerry Poole, longtime Nacogdoches County court reporter and a dear friend of the Jack Pierce family. Jerry, first, you got to play this little game with me. What are you drinking tonight?
Oh, my favorite drink, little Dr. Pepper Zero. Good. My favorite.
Jerry drinking the Dr. Pepper. I love that about you, Jerry. You're the most all-American person that I know. Did you win at golf today?
It was made in Dallas. You know that, don't you?
Oh, it was made in Dallas. It was a Texas drink.
Yeah, a pharmacist invented it in Dallas, Texas.
So it's medicinal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Certainly.
Good stuff. All right, Jerry, you are here because, woohoo, we are going to talk a little bit more about this story that I wrote called The Cat Ate Her Face. And by the time everybody hears this interview, they will have heard this story in full. This is part of a series called Murder and Crime in Nacogdoches, Texas. This is a special edition, again, because we are with Jerry Poole, who met the murderer, has so many interesting stories about this particular case. And so, Jerry, let's get to some of these questions. Now, are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
What's that say behind you on your screen there? Texas Court Reporters?
Yes, Texas Court Reporters Association, TCRA. Yeah.
You are the man. You've been doing this so long. How long?
Yeah. Well, I retired. I worked for your dad for about 28 and a half years, and I worked for Cam Cox for 13 and a half years. And then I retired in October on Halloween of 2013. Kind of thought it was appropriate time to give it back to him. And I kept working, subbing in for courts all around East Texas until COVID hit. And then we did some Zoom hearings, some COVID for a couple of years, and then I just decided to hang it up. I think I had a total of 50 years. That's about what, you're about 50, right?
What? That's not okay on this show. No, actually 50, that's fine. You want to think I'm 50? Let's go with that. Now, Jerry, I was thinking maybe we'd start with a very personal story that you told me about your grandfather and Edward Otho Hagins. Tell us.
Yeah. Well, when I knew this trial was fixing to happen in 78, I hadn't been working. Well, I was employed in June of 72. So anyway, I hadn't been there long. But my grandfather was still living. He lived in Rusk. And he worked at the maximum security unit at Rusk State Hospital. And when Hagins was on death row, Marion Hope filed a writ of habeas corpus to stop, or a motion to stop the death penalty because he was insane. And in Texas, you can't execute an insane person. So the judge granted it and sent him to Rusk. And he happened to be on the same facility at the Rusk State Hospital, maximum security, that my grandfather worked. And so I heard that we were going to try this case. And so I was over at my grandfather's, and I just happened to mention to him that he know this guy, Hagins. And he told me, he said, yes, I know him well. He said, he saved my life. And I said, well, how did he do that? And my grandfather was working an evening shift, which I think he got off at 10 at night. and he was at his desk working on some paperwork, and another inmate that was there had loosened a leg off of a chair, a wooden leg, and came up behind my grandfather and started beating my grandfather in the head. And Hagins was there, saw it, and he went and pulled this guy off of my grandfather. And I remember when it happened, I remember seeing my grandfather. He had a bunch of knots on his head and stitches. And so it's kind of weird that that happened back years ago, and had no idea that I'd be reporting a case that he was involved in.
Yes, it's just so crazy.
Right.
You know, Netflix wouldn't even accept all this because it'd be like, this is not believable. But
Yeah.
Eddie Hagin saved your grandfather's life. It's not a little thing.
Right.
It was, I mean,
Right.
he was being beaten, and for which he
Right.
needs stitches. So it's
Right.
so okay. So then you knew the story, and you told me then that you went up to him to ask
Yes.
Eddie Hagins if he
Well,
remembered
during
his
the trial,
grandfather at that retrial, 1978.
yeah, we had I don't remember how long we'd gotten into it, but he was there, and of course he was there. But during the break, I walked over to him and I asked him. I said, "Did you know a man in Russ Maximum Security Unit when you were there by the name of Marvin Gilbert?" That was my grandfather. And he said, "Oh yes, I knew Mr. Gilbert, and everybody called my grandfather by his last name, Gilbert." And he said, "I knew Gilbert," and he said he was a good man. He was telling me all about it and how he had pulled him off of this guy off of my grandfather when he was beating him. And he was totally coherent, and of course he was sane, of course. But I talked to him several times. I don't remember exactly each time what I talked about, but we visited several times during that trial.
Yeah, that's interesting that you said, well, he was sane, of course, but you know, in
Yeah.
1961, all the
Yeah.
doctors said that he was not. So, well, tell me a little bit about what he was like during the trial. You say, well, he was sane. So did you not see anything odd happening during that retrial?
Well, I don't know if he was not a very pretty man.
Yeah, so I
I don't
heard.
know if he had a strange look about his face. And I found out that actually when he was in prison, they had sent him to Galveston. He went to Galveston. They actually did some surgery on his face. And I've seen some picture of him back when the first trial occurred. That I think you posted some of those. And he looked a lot different the second trial. I mean, he really looked worse than he did. I think they did more damage than they did good.
That is what my dad said, that it was worse. And yeah, I do tell that story in the series. I do get to that because that's just one of the stranger pieces to it all, that he wound up looking worse. It's really sad. Yeah. So tell me about anything else regarding that trial that you remember. I mean, the trial of 1961 was so sensational because the murders had just happened. I mean, that trial came very quickly and ended very quickly, and the town was in such an uproar. But was there a lot of publicity at that time about the retrial?
I don't remember. I'm sure there was in the Daily Sentinel paper, but I do remember we had a pretrial hearing. Judge Pierce, of course, recused himself because of his involvement in the first trial, and the first judicial administrative district out of Dallas appoints someone to take his place, and they appointed a judge out of Dallas named James B. Zimmerman, and Judge Zimmerman was a district judge there who was pretty noted for his. I don't know. He was a German. He was pretty flamboyant, and I remember during the trial that he had these big old wingtip shoes that he'd always take off, and he wouldn't even come. He would get on the bench without shoes, and it's
that's
but we had a
comfortable.
Yeah, well, it was comfortable, but he was something else. But we had a pretrial hearing. And the court administrator at that time was Greg Langham. And Greg
Langham, my goodness.
Greg Langham, yeah. He had two brothers. he had two brothers, are police officers.
Yep.
Both deceased now. And anyway, we had a pretrial hearing, and Edith James was the attorney from Dallas who represented Hagin. And she was late. Judge Zimmerman was on the bench waiting on her. She came in the courtroom, and she had a stack of motions, probably 18 to 24 inches high. And she was lugging all this in, and she slammed them on the defense table. And Judge Zimmerman said, "Glad you could join us, even though you're late." And he said, "Miss James, are those your usual Dallas motions?" And she said, "Yes, sir, Judge, they all are, except maybe one." And he said, "Well, I'll just consider them overruled." And he didn't look at them. I don't know. He just said, "Your usual motions are all overruled." And,
Wow. And people say
then
Jack
he had
Pierce was
one more.
awfully tough. Okay.
But yeah, and that evening or during the trial, he wanted Greg and I to go with him over to Rosini's
Oh,
at night.
Yeah.
Yeah, the spaghetti house. And he would go in the bar, and that man would drink and drink. And Greg and I would sit there, and we had families. We needed to get home. It would be late trying to get out of there. And he'd sit there and talk and talk and talk. But he was kind of a character himself. Yeah.
Didn't you have some story about Marion Holt and Eddie Hagin's and the jail?
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't. This was during the first trial, and your daddy actually told me this story. And then Marion Holt later came in and he confirmed it, and he told and Marion told it too. And Marion was a little more colorful than your dad in telling the story, but it's a true story. It really is. Marion went up to the jail. John Lightfoot was the sheriff, and he asked to see his client. Of course, the jail at that time was in the courthouse, and it was upstairs. And so the judge, one of the sheriff said, "Sure," and had the jailer to take him up there. And I think the jailer was a trustee. And he took Marion up there. They didn't have a room to put him in. They just took him up to the cell and put Marion in the cell with the defendant. And well, Marion would talk to his client, for a while. And he figured out this guy's pretty crazy. And then his client stood over, and he was drinking water out of the toilet. This is how bad it was. And Marion was getting a little nervous. So Marion started yelling for the trustee, to come up and let him out. Well, they didn't hear him. And Marion stayed there all day. And it wasn't until late that afternoon that the jailer
Oh my gosh.
released him. He had to spend that whole day up in jail
Oh my
with the
goodness.
crazy man.
Yeah, because while you said, that in 1978, he looked very different and his demeanor might have been very different back
A little bit.
in 1961. I see my dad's notes that he made in this little ledger, and he could get violent or aggressive, and I do not want to be in a jail with him all day. So poor Marion. Of course, Marion, as I tell in the story, was such a badass in the war, and a lot of people know that. But I'm sure he managed very well. But that's quite the story.
Yeah. Marion was a good lawyer.
Yes, that's
Marion. He was an excellent lawyer. Yeah, he may not looked it, but Marion always wore these suits that were disheveled, and half of his shirt was out, and his tie was used as a napkin. And, he had food on his tie, and he had psoriasis really bad. Poor Marion, and he kept wiping his face with it because he had a nickname. It's called Scaly Holt.
Scaly Holt. Scaly Holt.
Tapeworm Tatum, yeah.
And what?
Paul Tatum.
Oh, Paul Tatum.
Tapeworm Tatum. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Paul Tatum was so skinny, you remember?
Yes.
They called him Scaly Holt and Tapeworm Tatum, yeah. Yeah.
That's Scaly Holt. Okay, all right. So that is part of what I love about this story. Because part of the story, of course, I learned so much from you, so much from my dad, but I have all the clippings, and the Houston and the Dallas press made quite a bit about Marion, because as you said, he seems so disheveled, and yet they called him the Percy Foreman of the Piney Woods, because he'd get you. He knew how to work it.
Right. He was good. Marion was very good.
But sadly, they weren't able to necessarily save these two. Now they did, in the end, I guess you could say they did, because neither one of them was executed. I don't want to give away too much, but most people
Right.
have already heard the end of this story. I wanted to ask you this question about, did Daddy ever say anything about Eddie Hagins or Elsie Marie Milner to you?
Well, yeah, we talked about it. His representation. Of course, he told a story about that. They filed a motion. Well, he told a story about getting appointed, and he really didn't feel like he was qualified. And he also said they filed a motion for change of venue and a motion to stop the circus-like atmosphere that was going on outside the courtroom. He said there was people would bring in their lunch sandwiches or lunch sacks in for the courtroom so they wouldn't lose their spot. He said that the courtroom would be actually packed. People would be waiting for the courtroom to open in the mornings, and it'd be a long line, and they would go in and they'd all have sack lunches. And so they would not miss their spot. They didn't want to miss any of the trial.
Well, this was all
They
before
were selling,
TV, so this must have been very exciting.
yeah. And they were selling peanuts and popcorn, and they were, making money out on the veranda out front of the courthouse.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
But,
Yeah. Just so historic, as I've been doing the podcast and seeing people write comments, it's interesting how many people's lives were touched by it,
Yeah.
It's a thing.
Right.
Was there anything else, I know you've been following some of the stories that I've been posting. Was there something else that you're like, oh, I want to be sure I say that I don't want to miss anything?
I do remember in the trial, MC Rulebook was testifying, and of course the trial was a lot shorter the second time because some of the witnesses, I think a lot of the witnesses weren't available then, but I do remember MC got on the stand and he was telling about the confession that they were asking about the confession. And of course, the Miranda decision, Miranda, Arizona, which required, to advise your client that you have the right to remain silent and all that stuff. Well, that hadn't been ruled on at that time. But I do remember specifically, MC slipped on the stand, and they were asking about on the way back, and he said, not Marion, but MC said yes. He said, and before he started telling me, I read him his Miranda, and he said, no, I didn't do that. That was not required then. He almost said that, and that's when he learned that they had been shot instead of beaten. Of course, they had indicted him for beating him to death, and then he found out on the way home, and then they had to exhume the bodies. Of course.
Isn't that something? I just think this would be a great movie.
I'd hate to have been the pathologist. I know.
Oh, I know, right? You're like, oops, sorry, oops.
I don't think you get an oops.
Well, Jerry, then I would just say that I love talking to you about all of the trials that you and Dad faced together. And so I know you didn't face this one necessarily together, but this was one of the few, right? But he had to recuse himself in the second, and was able to share with you a lot about the first. You weren't there yet in 1961, okay? But but some of the other stories that I'm going to tell, you will know all about. So next time on Untapped with ME, we are going to start a new story about another murder in Nacogdoches, Texas. And I'm going to call this one, The Bear Blew Him Away. And Jerry, this one is going to be about Kenneth Julian Palafox. You were there for that one, right?
Oh, yes. Both trials. We tried him twice too. I don't want to give anything away, but.
Yes. No. I was going to let you give a little teaser if you wanted to about that.
We tried him twice. But I won't say why. But I'll be glad to fill you in on that later.
Yeah, I will call you. We've talked about all of these, but I want to go back and refresh my memory on that. But then doing the research, just that, as always, it just seems like there's this after the story, and I
Yeah.
will be sharing that. And so I just hope everybody, if you would at home, just to toast to my dear friend, Jerry Poole, Nacogdoches court reporter, and Jerry, my dear, dear friend. So I'm gonna have a little, you have some Dr. Pepper there, just a minute.
All right.
That's so good. Okay, so we always close with subscribe and follow and tap in to Untapped with ME. Thank you, Jerry Poole.
See you later.
See you later.
Bye.